Hello, everyone. This is Dale Bowen with the Public Technology Institute, and welcome to the webinar and discussion 2026 Tech Forecast for State and Local IT, Navigating the Ever-Changing Technology Landscape. Over the next hour, Doug Robinson, Executive Director of the National Association of State CIOs, and Daryl Polk, Education Director with the Public Technology Institute, will present our annual preview of the issues and priorities that will impact state and local government IT in the coming year. For more than a decade, NASCIO and PTI have presented this tech forecast and has become quite popular. We have over 400 registrants for today's forecast. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to attendees. The forecast will highlight key findings from NASCIO and PTI research based on surveys, interviews with technology executives, and what we are hearing from our private sector partners. Doug Robinson with NASCIO will kick off the forecast with a look at the state tech landscape, and then turn over to Daryl Polk with PTI for a look at local government tech priorities and trends. We have reserved time to answer your questions. Several registrants submitted questions as part of the registration process, so please feel free to post questions to the Q&A link. Now, I would like to turn the mic over to Doug Robinson, Executive Director of NASCIO.
Dale, thank you, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We were debating during the practice session. I believe this is our 14th year consecutively of doing this webinar with PTI, so we certainly enjoy the collaboration, and this is one of the few events where you're going to get both the state and local view encapsulated and synthesized kind of in 1 hour. And we also try to do that quickly so that we have lots of time for questions. We already had more than a dozen of those questions pre-submitted at registration and got those highlighted, and I've got those kind of lined up to address those once we get done with our comments. So we're going to share a lot of data with you today, both from the state and local government IT perspective, and utilize existing resources and surveys and some prognostication. I call this a forecast. Because no one can really be effective in predicting the future. We can kind of forecast some of the major trends. So Daryl and I will do that. So let me kick off, and I will launch my slides here for everyone, and we will start with the states. So let me back up here a little bit. Again, 2026 forecast, and the first thing I'm going to do, which is the kind of most important level setting piece of data that you're going to get today from the NASCIO perspective and the state CIOs, is our annual top 10. This was released in mid-December. We do this every year, have for 20 years, where we survey with a forced choice ballot our state CIOs. In this case, it represents responses from 51 state and territorial CIOs, and we've asked them to prioritize their strategies and their processes and solution that's going to be the highest priority for them in the upcoming calendar year we're in right now, 2026. A few surprises in 2026. Most importantly, artificial intelligence, Gen AI, machine learning moves into the #1 slot. Cybersecurity had been #1 for 12 consecutive years. Again, #1 for 12 consecutive years. The only topic on the top 10 since its inception 20 years ago. So it's very interesting to see this. I certainly was not surprised to see AI. It was a very close #2. I think what's interesting about the explosive growth of this is the fact that in 2023, AI was not even on the top 10 list. It was close, but it wasn't on the list. And so in that amount of time, it moved up from #3 to #2 and then #1 position in 2026. Also very unusual to see what I would consider kind of a technology solution or stack be so high, because it's just all encompassing and it's kind of overtaken in terms of the conversation. So we'll talk more about that. Cyber in #2. Again, not surprisingly, budget and cost control, which have been off the list for a number of years, came back on last year and has rocketed up to #3. That's, I think, in anticipation of what we're going to talk about, a little fiscal uncertainty, a little modest revenue growth. Some states have already begun to take measures to do some budget cutbacks and rollbacks. The consensus forecasts of revenue are coming in lower across the number of states. So, and then of course, federal funding declines impact all of that. Modernization remains on the list, always high. Digital government was #3 and has moved down just a tick. I think the other thing to talk about is accessibility, and I'll mention that during my remarks, but accessibility came in to the top 10 last year at number 10, number 6 this year, again, driven by the DOJ final rule, which compels state and local governments, large cities and counties to meet the accessibility requirements for web and mobile applications by April 2026. So that's important. Identity and access management, always on the list. Data and management, always on the list. Cloud services consolidation, they continue to move down as we see more and more maturity off the list last year, low. And I think that's just a recognition of the maturity of the constant change in state government, particularly around the maturity of adoption of cloud services, which I believe first appeared on the NASCIO list in 2008 or 9. So it's now probably going to roll off as we see that broader adoption across the states. The other high priority, of course, is the state CIO transitions that we track. Currently, two transitions already in 2026, 11 in 2025. And if you look across the last 3 years, 46 gubernatorial 46 CIO transitions in the last 3 years, calendar years, within the NASCIO community. So a continued high degree of churn to a sense, but relatively similar to 2024 and last year. We also have, I guess, with discussion I'll have at the end here about upcoming elections. Again, median tenure right now about 32 months. That's been fairly stable. So what's not changing? Well, I think the major CIO challenges that we see across the board have not changed. Continued issues about modernizing the environment, just modernization of both systems and processes, and continuing the balance of modernization and legacy modernization along with innovation. Always a challenge among CIOs at state and local level. Certainly, funding constraints. Always a challenge with state CIOs is enterprise alignment. How do you have visibility in what's going on in the agencies? Is that statutorily? Is it a highly unified and centralized IT governance arrangement, or is it more federated or a little bit decentralized? And so you have that challenge from a leadership perspective is driving and those enterprise initiatives in a federated environment. And there's many examples of where that becomes challenge of things like cybersecurity, identity and access management. Those are all major enterprise initiatives that you need buy-in from across all those line of business or those functional domains of the state agencies. We'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity. So what's trending in terms of the late 2025 into today? Not surprisingly, at the top of the list is the interest in AI, generative AI, agentic AI. There's been a major surge in kind of the moving from the pilot and the testing phase now into production. We're seeing that. We recognized several states in October at our annual conference and the recognition awards for their AI applications that were in production and had shown meaningful results and outcomes. And so we're going to see more and more of that across all state government agencies. I think the other part of that is experiencing unmanaged expectations of what AI can do and perhaps some missteps along the way. And so those are going to come out in 2026. I think that there's a general anxiety around just the entire focus on AI and the fact that it is not a magic bullet for all of the woes within the state tech stack. And so they're going to have to kind of step back and be a little bit more realistic. We're seeing, along with that, a dramatic increase over the last year, and we expect to see that in 2026 in state tech policy legislation. I'll talk more of that at the end of my comments. And I think finally, we can all certainly understand federal funding uncertainty, the kind of instability of the institutional review over the states, federal funding reductions, the devolution of many programs, particularly in cybersecurity, elimination of key programs that the states have now had to take on. And I think most importantly for NASCIO and some of the other major associations representing state and local governments is the continued pressure on reducing state AI regulations, an attack on state, trying to preempt those regulations, a moratorium on those regulations, including most recently in December, the presidential executive order, which tries to define burdensome AI state regulations and provides some action from the Department of Justice to look at states and identify whether they actually have burdensome AI regulations in place. So typically don't use this forum to talk about our advocacy and what we're doing, but this is kind of top of mind and really the most important thing we've dealt with in the last several years, which is advocating on behalf of the state CIO and the state leadership around these moratorium bills that appeared and then were fortunately successfully thwarted late in July, along the reconciliation bill, but also then continuing activity with the AI action plan coming out of the White House, which talks again about burdensome AI regulations in the state and the need for a consistent framework, and then striking down some of those things. And most recently, again, as I mentioned, the executive order, and you can see a joint statement with the National Conference of State Legislators, United the Council of State Governments, National League of Cities, NACO, all of us, and the joint letter were signatories on that letter in December, in late December, basically saying we need to have a discussion and more collaboration around these frameworks. And I think the bottom line here is that we would all agree that a preferable model would be a collaborative model between the federal government and state governments around AI regulations, perhaps with a federal a floor with the states being able to build on that. But absent that, in discussions, which just took place last week in multiple congressional committees, there's a major divide about that approach and that philosophy. So enough on that, but that's a major thrust of our 2026 advocacy efforts will be to continue to monitor this and push back on preemption language around state AI because there's no real structure to that, and it's injurious to the states that have made a lot of progress in protecting their consumers from some of the harms from that we've seen from AI being deployed in inappropriate manner. So that's something that's really key. So let me jump quickly to cybersecurity, then I'll end up with some data around AI. And certainly, if you look at kind of the top 5 challenges, and this is from our study of chief information security officers, these have been consistent for many years. The funding is not adequate for the risk that states are approaching, and by that we mean state funding. You see the percentages there. We're seeing increasing sophistication of the threats, a lot of growth in third party as well as foreign these foreign actors, China, Russia, North Korea, are attacking the states on a massive and regular basis, seeing the same thing in local governments. There's concern about AI. It's a double-edged sword. It can be very beneficial for states in terms of the use embedded in their security tools, and many of them already have those tools in place. But it also creates opportunities for more sophisticated phishing attacks and more sophisticated social engineering by using generative AI to spoof citizens and employees. And so that's a problem. Continuing challenges recruiting and retaining. And of course, always as a foundational of this is the technical debt the states have embedded already in their legacy systems and the challenges that chief security officers have with that large environment and what they're going to do in terms of protect that from these bad actors that continue to use more sophisticated threats against the states. So let's talk a little bit about AI, and I won't go through all of these, but this is essentially from our original blueprint that NASCIO put out in 2023, outlining where states should take action in terms of, in this case, the focus on generative AI, because we were seeing discussions and the early kind of indications that states were going to be releasing policies and frameworks about AI and AI governance. So we put together a blueprint and basically said to the states, there's about a dozen things that states should be looking at as they begin to craft their kind of AI agenda, so to speak, for the next few years. You can see, all of these here, and we've talked about these now for several years. What we're tracking then in terms of our survey is what have states done in response, and are they meeting kind of these parameters of the blueprint? How much have they really done in terms of transparency and accountability? Do they have an ethical and responsible use policy? And so we've been tracking that through our survey. So I'll quickly bring up some of the responses from our state CIO survey in late 2025. We asked them, what was the status of these kind of framework initiatives? 88% said they had already adopted some kind of responsible use. Again, this is 6 months ago, so this data was collected. So I would say today, based on what we've seen anecdotally, this certainly exceeds the low 90s. So more than 90% of the states now have this in place. Again, more than 90 have some kind of inventory. Many of those are not published externally, but they are statutorily required by some of the bills that were passed in 2024. And again, 80+% have created some type of advisory board. Some of those are crafted by legislation. There's a mandatory group. Some have been formed informally, and there's a task force. But many of these, I think, have become kind of institutionalized, and you're going to see more of that, particularly as legislative bodies believe that there needs to be some type of oversight and accountability by a task force. And those members may, in fact, be from private sector companies, they're from universities, they're from think tanks. We're seeing that develop, and those groups are becoming more institutionalized. So for these other topics, you can see the responses where states were, again, about 6 months ago on this, and I would expect extrapolating that many of these percentages have increased as more and more states have moved along. We still see kind of low in procurement terms, disclosure requirements, although there's been a lot of discussion about that IT vendors to the state are going to have to mandatory disclosure in their terms and conditions. And then, of course, what we're seeing is a major gap and a barrier is that workplace, the workforce skills gap and the workforce readiness for AI. And there's again a double-edged sword there in terms of how much training, but also there's a lot of resistance to some of the utilization of these tools by rank and file employees because they believe that they are there to basically subsume their job, to take their role. We haven't seen evidence of that. That's not a high response rate that we're getting from our CIOs, but that could be some of the discussion going on with the employees. So when we're asking about, where they are in terms of their status of activities around pilots and production, and again, you can see the responses here from our states. I should have mentioned this represents over 50 state CIOs in the response to this national survey that we did. Pilot projects at a very high level, proofs of concept. Again, I expect that some of these have already ticked up a few. There was a real gap, I think, in state employee training. We did a couple of national studies and surveys on that and pointed that out. And we've seen, I think, significant growth in those offerings from the state, some requiring employee training for anybody that's going to be using the AI. And some states have even said, has gone as far as say, if a legislator is going to be using AI, that they need to get training. They've done that through policies through their legislative process. So the one thing that is the gap here and will continue to be, I think, is dedicated funding around AI. We're not seeing a great funding pools being coalesced around this, and we're seeing more and more CIOs having to take this out of their operating budget, and the agencies taking it out of their programmatic budget. So this is going to just be part of the trend. Is this is going to be business as usual as part of any technology tools being brought into state agencies in terms of delivering on their mission. They're going to be funding that out of their operating budget from general revenue. So when you look at those use cases and the growth of that and what we're kind of seeing early on in production, these are the five based on our data supplied by CIOs and our analysis. These are the five most common. Not surprisingly, at the top of the list is AI-supported chatbots, virtual agents. We're seeing a number of states now making all that available on their state websites. I believe Indiana was the first state. We recognized them as a finalist on one of our awards, the first state to have full AI search capabilities with their state website, Ask Indiana. So there's a good example of what states are going to be doing in the future. Just recently, internally, California announced the release of Poppy, and that's their internal kind of retrieval augmented. Poppy is an AI model, but only accessing state website data, and it's for internal employees only in the state of California. And so right now we're going to see a growth in that. And many of these, as you see, are focused internally, and I expect we're going to see more and more externally focused Gen AI to support citizen services in 2026, as a lot of these have been focused on internal employee productivity, analytics, document generation, analysis, code development. So again, that's of all of the use cases that were supplied to us by CIOs. This is the most common. And when you look across the domains of state government, kind of the lines of business, and again, this is the distribution table, just kind of showing based on the data supplied to us in December, asking that question, where is AI? Where is AI being used today in what lines of business in the state? And it didn't represent all the states, but again, you can see, not surprisingly, given the funding and the the breadth of services provided in things like human services and entitlement programs, that's at the top of the list along with transportation. And so, again, I think the size of these agencies, the scope of the services they're providing to citizens, the entitlement programs, many of them heavily funded, like health services from the federal government. You're seeing a lot of use in there, and these are in production, not in pilot. So we're seeing again across the board those types of activities. So let me wrap up here with what we're seeing in our perspective in terms of Gen AI adoption and particularly around the biggest problems and the barriers. And I don't think this is going to surprise anybody, but lack of enterprise governance. And again, but that means really robust governments, having all of the stakeholders involved in that shared kind of decision making, bringing, in our case, since the state CIOs are responsible for the executive branch, getting all those actors together and to play nicely among these conversations because every agency might have a different. They need to have foundational discussions, particularly around what are we going to invest in, how's it going to be deployed, what are we doing in pilots, and again, many CIOs have taken on that role. We have a number of states that have, I think, a really well developed governance process at this point. They've created centers of excellence. They have overarching boards or some type of task force or council that they're working with. They're using their vendor partners in the private sector. They're working with universities. So some really good examples out there. Uh, if it wasn't for bad data, states wouldn't have any at all. I hear that quote all the time from CIOs. Poor data quality. That's a big challenge. You don't want to bring that data in that. So that's something states are going to have to address as they get into multi-dimensional type of AI projects. They're going to have to really be conscious of the data quality so that they are not simply cranking out solutions or results that are based on flawed data. And I already mentioned workforce readiness. You see some of these others things about shadow use as a concern. There's a number of general counsels that have talked about legal issues, talked about the disposition of digital records. AI prompts and results are, in fact, public records. They may not be open public records, but you are creating a record. And many states have already come out with advisories or guidance saying you must make those things in terms of preserving them in a digital format. You must do that. And so those are some of the challenges that the states are having. From the regulation standpoint, I think this is very interesting, and I'll end here, is the artificial intelligence legislation in 2025 across the states grew dramatically, almost double what we saw in 2024. This is from our friends and colleagues at NCSL from the end of 2025 sessions. And what's interesting is what happened in 2024 was the predominant number of bills were focused on state government use of AI. That flipped pretty substantially in 2025, where it was focused, as you see, 475 bills introduced that focused on the private sector use, the commercial use, the concerns around deepfakes, the concerns around child safety, child pornography, concerns about the use of AI in campaigning, the concerns about the use of AI across health things. We have multiple bills introduced about companion chatbots or the use of AI to provide mental health and therapy. Again, there's many programs now that are being launched that are using AI to do these things. States legislators are very concerned about all of these aspects and want to regulate it. And a number of these bills, in some cases, states like Texas and California had almost 40 bills that were introduced across all dimensions of artificial intelligence. So this is going to continue to grow in 2026. We're already seeing some indications of that, monitoring a lot of bills, and we're seeing new aspects of this come up. I will not cover this, but for those of you that want to see the copies of this is kind of a summary of all those themes. Again, based on those bills, and a lot of it has to do with privacy, security, prohibiting the use of certain AI in certain dimensions, things like health screening, things like eligibility determination for Medicaid or any federal programs. The state's agencies are going to be prohibited from using AI tools to do that. The human must be on the front and center of those decisions. So these are some of the things that we're seeing across the states and are being monitored by, again, the NCSL folks that are focused on this. So what to watch in 2026? Let me wrap up. Already talked about a number of these topics. I think we're going to see continuing growth and interest in AI adoption. We're seeing many more of those already into production. That's going to grow. I think we're going to have some again, missteps along the way, and states are going to have to step back and reevaluate that because there is just a it just seems to be unmanaged expectations about what AI can do in state government, and the technical capacity and workforce skills are very thin. And I think states are going to have to be cautious, about that. On the federal side, the state and local cyber security grant program has just recently been extended through the fiscal year, but with no funding. So it was set to expire. It was extended, and now we have no funding for that program, but at least the programmatic framework has been extended, so there may be an opportunity to continue to push that. NASCIO has advocated for reauthorization of that program, reauthorization over a multi-year, perhaps as long as 10 years for that to support, particularly, again, the money for this goes to local governments and cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection, training, and awareness. And no dollars have been appropriated to continue that program. I think we certainly believe that the House and the White House will continue efforts to preempt state AI laws so whatever mechanism they can. Right now, the executive order will be, I'm sure, does not have a constitutional legal standing over the states. So I suspect we're going to see a long, drawn out court battle around what can happen there. And then the DOJ accessibility guidelines, those mandates go into effect in terms of compliance in April, and the states are rushing to see that. And then finally, on the state fiscal conditions, I think we're going to continue to see economic uncertainty that driven by the fact that there is such uneasiness around continued federal funding. And then there's multiple provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act around Medicaid and SNAP and others that are going to really impact the states in 2027. So coming up fiscal year, that would be after July of 2026 for most states. So, and of course, what to watch in 2026, the major issue for NASCIO and for our state members is the fact that we have 39 gubernatorial elections across the states and territories. Many of those are term limited. You can see all those that are in the kind of the orange color. Those are all states where the governor either has announced that they're going to retire, which a couple of them, and the rest are all term limits. These were we new governors in all those states. Every CIO is an appointee. They work for the governor, and so we're going to see in 2027, I think, a substantial churn of our state CIOs, and we've seen that before many years ago. So a lot to digest. I went through that very, very quickly. I'm going to stop my screen sharing and we're going to turn this over to Daryl for thoughts and perspectives on local government. Daryl.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. That was super informative. And as you'll see from our research, there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of trickle down from state activities going down and affecting local governments. A lot of the same dynamics at the federal level are influencing local technology adoption and progression. So I'm going to share my slide deck here real quick. And so for ours, our sample group is a bit different. As Doug said, he's got all 50 states and the territory. So having a full 51 is a very full and robust representation of the state landscape. At the local level, our sampling pool is our membership and also people participating in our education program. So we have a pretty robust number of people participating in our surveys. We did do the same structure as the NASCIO format, limiting it to 10 forced choice to rank. And our ranking came out slightly different. Cybersecurity held the #1 spot for local government, but artificial intelligence moved up the power rankings and is a close #2. And kind of feeding off of a lot of your comments, Doug, about the influence of AI on cybersecurity, my anecdotal kind of reasoning on that is that I think a lot of artificial intelligence is influencing the landscape on cybersecurity. It's not just the cat and mouse threat actor and response management, but as you said, it's the soft attacks. It's the ability to create and amplify human-centric threat actor activity, phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks. But also, I think it's influencing everybody's mindset on what is veracity. Unfortunately, you have kind of a double-edged sword where you have people that have become perhaps more susceptible and more gullible to bad actor activity, and then those that are more skeptical and have taken on more of a guarded stance, knowing that there's so much AI generated activity out there. But either way, it creates a huge challenge for local government, especially when you have such a disparity in resources and maturity amongst local, city, townships, and then special district technology platforms. So number two is artificial intelligence, generative AI, agentic AI, machine learning. Number three is budget. And interestingly, anecdotally on that, from conversations, even though it came in number three on the polling, it is the first thing that is talked about when I'm engaging with local government IT officials, and especially recently. And I think that some of that is trickle down from uncertainty about federal funding and federal regulation, how that's going to affect states, and ultimately the trickle down to counties and then local government, but also uncertainties about the economy, uncertainties about historic revenue sources such as sales tax, which has a lot of influence from tariff policies and economic policies. So you have it's kind of a churn of multiple layers of influence that are affecting everybody's budget forecasting. Modernization came in at number four for local government, and then identity and access management right behind that. And identity and access management has also moved up the power rankings for local government, and I think that that goes hand in hand with the modernization play as we're seeing the move from on-premise kind of behind firewalls applications into more cloud-based, kind of the post-pandemic workforce, where you have ubiquitous access and you have a lot more hybrid work or fully remote work that's involved in local government. Provision of digital government, digital services has taken the number six spot. Accessibility is number seven. But once again, anecdotally, because of that deadline in April, we are hearing more chatter from local government leaders about how they're going to meet that. I think that there was a little bit of uncertainty because they're looking at the broader landscape federally to see, does this get affected by some of the other federal initiatives and direction that's coming out, especially when it comes to executive orders. But for right now, it seems to be in place. And so you do have local governments that are working hard to make sure that they're compliant by April. Data management and analytics has held in the top 10, but has kind of held in that bottom third for a while. I think it's a quiet desire for a lot of cities, especially for larger or mid-sized cities and counties that have a lot of moving parts in their organization. And there's been this desire to kind of have data-driven policies and data-driven decision-making. Nobody's let go of that, but it just is constantly playing against all these other forces that keep it at a lower priority than everybody would like it to be. Cloud services came in at number nine, as well as consolidation and optimization. And Doug, I think the state and local governments mirror what you kind of insinuated, is that you've seen kind of the maturity of cloud movement move through state and local government. I think that obviously, smaller municipalities or smaller organizations have a tough time kind of making that move from CapEx to OpEx and kind of absorbing costs that are now going to be recurring and workload oriented that you get when you go to cloud. But overall, I think that we're seeing the maturity of that curve over the past 15 years, where that'll continue to drop as just that becomes the norm. I think that the idea of the on-premise data center, physical data center, definitely still has value in the local government space, but you are seeing more and more services being offloaded from that, and the footprint of that and the refresh cycle and that as a strategy kind of just gradually ticking down over time. So when we dig into our numbers and you look at actually kind of how the priorities kind of shook out with the polling, we had 45% of our respondents rate cybersecurity as their highest priority. So it wasn't the highest priority for everybody. It just was the largest by volume amongst the respondents. But if you look, Gen AI wasn't far behind that, and budget wasn't far behind that. So if you look at the actual highest priority, Budget is higher than Gen AI in terms of the percentage of people who said that was their number one priority. So 17% rated AI as their number one, but 19% rated budget. But when you factor in the full respondents and kind of that tiered ranking, budget falls behind AI. My guess on this is as we get further into the budget season for 2026, you're going to see budget float up very quickly, and it may actually overtake cybersecurity in that cybersecurity, especially for state or for local governments, for counties and cities, is often driven by budget. So there's an element of cybersecurity that's obviously cultural and that is kind of maintaining a posture within the organization. But obviously there's investments that are tied to that. And especially when we're talking about, once again, the cat and mouse game between threat actors and defending against them, because like the states, counties and cities are under relentless attack from national threat actors or international, private threat actors. And it's because the tools have become so ubiquitous and such a low barrier to adoption for these threat actors that they can just have persistent attacks going against perimeter defenses for local, state, and local government, and understanding that local governments often have no choice but to pay the ransom because either it's a disruption to services that they can't absorb or because they don't have sufficient cyber insurance. And that's another discussion we probably should take on someday is the cyber insurance landscape, cybersecurity insurance, and how the premiums on that are starting to really bump up against everybody's readiness and ability to absorb these attacks when they land. And then when you get down to, once again, that cloud services consolidation optimization, you start to see how quickly those start to collapse. I'm with you. I think that by next year or the year after, we may see those actually drop off the top 10 and some new areas of focus go into the top 10. So, this is my concluding slide on this, and it really echoes your conclusion, Doug, is that uncertainty right now is the driver. And I think uncertainty at the federal level in terms of policy, in terms of, the executive office policy versus congressional oversight policies, not knowing how some of these decisions are going to shake out long term, but understanding that they are in play short term, to your point on the executive order for AI regulation. We understand it's in play. We understand that we have to comply with that, but it's being challenged in the courts. We don't know how Congress is going to weigh in or how they're going to actually counterbalance that, or if they are. So there's a little bit of wait and see on that. And I think that that's also trickling down to how implementation of AI is being looked at the local level. I think that the predominant deployment matches the strategy that the states are using, where AI is being used as a supplemental tool for staff to expand performance and kind of make people more productive rather than replace people entirely. And there's two drivers on that we're seeing. Number one is we are starting to see a lot of veteran employees age out of the system. So people like myself and Gen X are starting to hit the magic numbers in their 50s and 60s where they're hitting their retirement goals. And as they're aging out, we're seeing a delta in the skill sets and especially in institutional knowledge that the next generation of leaders and of highly specialized employees would need to have to backfill that. And I think that AI is being looked at as a way of bridging that, having internal systems where you can access legacy data, where you can access policies, where you can access hopefully some of the institutional knowledge. I think learning management and being able to start offloading some of that knowledge into some type of data format, probably unstructured, but now we have ways of dealing with that effectively, but just getting it somewhere where AI can consume it. Because right now it exists in a lot of people's heads, and getting that somewhere that it can be transitioned to some type of a learning platform. And if AI assists people in accessing it, great, but it's understanding you're not going to have the same ramp that you had for these people building up expertise over 10, 20, 30 years of employment. So there are other uncertainties, though, than government. It's the uncertainty in the technology space. Right now, it feels like the Wild West with AI. You're seeing new platforms drop almost daily. There was a Gartner report last year that talked about 2 to 3 new AI platforms being dropped every business day. And so you have just this kind of onslaught of opportunities that are coming at local governments, but it's now having to vet that. And you have procurement processes that are woefully out of date to deal with that. I think cooperative agreements have helped quite a bit on that, but there's still a huge delta between a mature procurement policy that matches the current landscape and the legacy procurement policies that many, many local governments use that's based on procurement of physical goods, that's based on commoditized purchase. So, yeah, I think that right now for 2026, uncertainty is going to be the biggest driver in the local government landscape. So I'm looking forward to talking with you about, how you see this playing out and how you see all of this impacting both of our realms here.
All right, Daryl, thank you for your comments. Your discussion on procurement certainly resonates with us, and we've been talking about IT procurement reform for 20 something years. It's a slow process. We have aspirational hope that hope is not a good strategy, but we're certainly going to look at it. I had a conversation on a panel session last year where the state was considering banning the use of AI by the proposers, by the vendors for preparation of their proposals. And my comment was, why would you do that? The proposal will probably be better than what you're getting
Yeah.
today. But they thought that by banning the use of AI, that it would level the playing
Well,
field.
you could see where the cat and mouse could come in, where local governments are using AI to review proposals. So
Exactly.
it just becomes a cycle. AI is producing the RFP, AI is being used to produce the response, and AI is being used to review the response.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
maybe that's the answer.
Yeah. We're gonna have fun with that. So we do have a number of questions. We're gonna try to get to as many as we can. So I'm just gonna go in order that they were submitted, and we can go back and forth on the state and local perspective. Where does citizen identity and access management rank among the 2026 priorities, and what best practices are emerging, moving from fragmented departmental logins to a unified model, including delegated access? Well, that's been the question of the ages on the state side. I've said for many, many years, IAM has been on the top 10 list, both in terms of priorities as well as on the technology. In some cases, it's been number one on the technology solution stack. So, but there's a long way. Like I said, it's part of the Harvard knowing doing gap. Right, the states all know that that's critical for the movement of particularly for external. So it's been in place for some of the internal process for a number of years, but in terms of forward external facing IAM solutions for digital credentials for citizens, it's been certainly a challenge. So I think it's high priority for 2026, particularly because of the security concerns, particularly because of privacy, particularly because the tremendous growth in fraudulent activity that we've seen over the last few years. The one way to really address that is have highly verifiable credentials and that you can, that high degree of integrity and credibility. Lots of discussions around that from the states. So I see more movement on that. I've seen states that have already begun and for several years moved in that direction of an enterprise solution. I would certainly point to Ohio and Michigan, Tennessee, Ohio, OHID. I think we're one of our award recipients for their work building essentially an enterprise platform that all the agencies can then use so that as a citizen, you don't have 10 different logins and 10 different digital credentials to get to state services. So again, I think everybody understands the need, but there's a lot of organizational resistance. In some cases, there's a lack, in many states, there's a lack of enterprise funding. But I know that a number of state CIO and state IT strategic plans, we review them, and if you look at them, you will see identity management front and center in many of those as a pillar of what they want to do this year. So, Daryl, what are you seeing in the local government space?
Yeah, in the local government space, I think you're seeing that really become a focus for counties because it's to your point, it's kind of the linchpin for fraud detection and fraud prevention that if you have verified single identity, you now have this huge kind of tool to make sure that you don't have people starting fraudulent accounts, you don't have people starting accounts in other people's names. These are all kind of the persistent low-hanging fruit that kind of becomes, and the problem I see with that is that, especially in today's landscape, that if you call fraud, whether it's justified or not, regardless of the context, you have the spotlight on you. We're seeing that with Minnesota right now, where I have not seen any of the details on it, but it can't seem to escape the headlines once that flare has been put in the air. With the counties, it's interesting because when you describe it, I can see the inherent problem is that even if counties start working on consolidated identity at a county level, it now floats up to state, and a lot of the services that people receive kind of float between federal, state, and county level. So you could have somebody receiving Social Security that has to have a verified federal ID, but somebody receiving state Medicare or Medicaid or other medical or supplemental health stuff where that's managed at a state level. But then if they're receiving other social services, they have another identity at the county level. And I would say that, the holy grail is obviously if we can get a single identity out there that is just their confirmed identity that works at all levels. But right now, I just don't see how at the federal, state, and county level you can get that level of coordination and that level of cohesion to say, hey, we're going to center around a central digital identity, a CAIM solution that covers all three. But
Yeah, and that's you talk. That's the kind of the crux of the argument too. So that's certainly something we've talked about in NASCIO. I think the reliance. So there's two schools of thought. One is the foundational document for identities, your driver's license, and many states have moved along that. Particularly with we've got 16 or 17 states now with mobile driver's license, and the question is, can that become your digital identity for transactions and certainly presentment and transaction with the states? There's other school of thought, which is we should move away from that. It should be sovereign identity and using verifiable digital credentials, where that's essentially owned by this individual citizen and not by a federal, state, or local jurisdiction. And they use that VDC to conduct transactions. So I think we're going to see those play out over the next few years. And obviously there's multiple concerns about both in terms of
right.
the integrity of that. So yeah, that's a whole. In fact, we did a whole webinar in NASCIO just a few months ago on these whole discussions around identity management. Let me move to another question real quick because I think this is probably more in your line. Educational opportunities available for emerging technologies for successful career growth and certifications. One that I would point to, if you're not familiar with Innovate US, because I've attended a number of those. The Innovate US is already deployed a number of modules on AI. That's their focus on emerging technologies, and they're doing it in various actual domains. They just released one in law enforcement and public safety, but they do a general one. They provide a certification, but it is not a it's essentially a certification of completion, but you can get those are all free. You can go through 7 or 8 modules and listen to experts talk about AI and generative AI across the board. So that's one we're familiar with. And we know a number of states have already signed agreements, New Jersey being one, to sign agreements with them to deliver these courses to all state employees as part of their requirements. But there's a number of others groups that obviously you can get certifications on in these emerging technologies. But Daryl, this is really in your space, so let me kick this over to you for the local government side.
Yeah, that's definitely a lollipop pitch for us. So, our focus is really on education and career development at PTI. So we offer the CGCIO program, which is a nationally accredited program to Rutgers University for getting IT executives ready. We also offer a Foundations of Leadership course for people that are kind of aspiring to go into IT leadership. There are other programs out there that are similar. On the AI front that you mentioned, there are some coalitions that are forming that are offering a lot of really, really good platforms for discussion and to kind of discover how other people are managing it. The GovAI Coalition out of San Jose, California is rapidly growing. I think they have over 2,000 members, and they're really focused on city municipality special district, but NACO has also got a subcommittee in their technology advisory group that's focused exclusively on AI, and they've been active now for I think 3 or 4 years. So really since the inception of Gen AI and that first kind of introduction of Open AI about 3 years ago, and they've done some fantastic work on model policies and kind of getting some of the nuts and bolts ready, as you pointed out in your earlier presentation. It's the pregame, it's your data awareness, data readiness, data veracity. If you got bad data, you're gonna have bad AI, and that's the bottom line. And I think a lot of people become enamored with the end product, not realizing the work that goes into having a really mature and ready data set for that AI to consume.
Mhm. Yeah, very good. Like I said, you've got a whole portfolio of work, and you're more familiar with what's going on in that space. NASCIO does not have specific training programs, so to speak. We have our own internal extensive leadership summits, but those are for our communities of practice and state CIOs, and those are we convene those every summer. So they're very valuable for them, but they're not open except for our membership. Uh, I got a number of questions here. I'm gonna skip down here to one I love, my favorite ones. What happened to blockchain? Are there use cases in state and local governments have incorporated blockchain solution? Well, yeah, blockchain. In fact, I had to kind of refresh myself of when we published our blockchain primer and introduction to blockchain. I think it was 2016. 10 years ago, we put out a piece on the promise and peril, like what's going to happen to blockchain, and essentially it was a technology looking for kind of use cases within state
Yeah.
government that no state government was actually uh, really looking at that. More locals were looking at that for things like property records than states were. It's been slow to grow, but in the last couple of years, surprisingly, we've seen a resurgence in the blockchain area, particularly for states. Wyoming, from a policy and legal perspective, is probably what you would not think, but Wyoming is probably the national leader in that space. In fact, it's built on their whole crypto model. They just issued the first Wyoming stable coin. So the first state to actually issue a crypto stable coin and just a few weeks ago. So Wyoming's kind of taken the lead on that, but and a legal and a policy standpoint, they have a lot of people that want to talk about blockchain in Wyoming. Other states have had some efforts in blockchain policy, blockchain governance, trying to spur it along, but those have kind of really sputtered and haven't taken place. But we do have places like Georgia, Florida, and others that still have blockchain efforts going on. Utah, another state that's doing some things with have some blockchain applications. Last year, Indiana the governor signed a new bill that would really move blockchain along in the state of Indiana by uh, issuing a information request exploring how blockchain technology can be used by state agencies for greater cost and efficiency. That report is supposed to be released in March of 2026. So that was again went into effect in 2025. At this point, among these other states that I mentioned, New York has done some work. I would characterize probably Texas as being the market leader right now. If you're interested in what's going on in blockchain, both from a state government standpoint, but just in terms of just the economic work that's going on. They have the Texas Blockchain Council, which has been extremely active. I think it's over 100 companies that are members of that. They had multiple in the last two legislative sessions. I had to refresh myself. They had two or three major blockchain bills that passed for pilot projects, particularly around land records and property records. And interestingly, just this week, our friend in contact, Representative Gio Capriglione from Texas, who's kind of their technology champion, was just named the president of the Texas Blockchain Council. And so I've
Oh,
known Gio for a few years. He was a former NASCIO Technology Champion Award recipient as a legislator. So he's been really big on AI, really big on modernization, cybersecurity, and now he's Mr. Blockchain apparently. So again, look for that's kind of our response. But again, I think we're going to see growing use cases, but it's definitely has been resurgent in the last couple of years.
yeah, I'm with you. I think that the way that it was introduced and that it was tied to cryptocurrency, which in its infancy, if you look at it in its infancy, the value that it immediately found was anonymous transactions amongst low trust individuals. So, my city manager back in the day hit me up and said, "Hey, what are we doing with blockchain?" I said, "What do you want to do, boss? Do you want to run guns or drugs?" And so I said, "That's what it's being used for right now." Do we have a problem with trust in permitting? Do we have a problem because we didn't manage the property records? We didn't manage at the city level. I think at the county level, you saw a high interest in using it for validation for property records. A lot of county assessors have kind of looked into that. But to your point, I think that it needed to go through a maturity curve where the problem presented itself and then the solution could come in because it was just a solution hunting a problem when it first came out. And I think the associations on it and the way it was deployed just didn't make it a feasible solution for a lot of things. And it was kind of it was a very low ranking problem at the time. And I think now that you're seeing a much more sophisticated kind of digital threat landscape when it comes to duplication of property records, duplication of identity, as we get into verified, identity for constituents, I think blockchain is going to have a role in that. So it's good to see that the states have kind of held the torch on it and that they're finding that application. But at the local level, I think that we're going to be much more sympathetic to the states and to the feds on how it gets deployed.
Okay, we got time for probably a couple more here. So let me go to one on Gen AI. Many government leaders see the potential of Gen AI, but face informal resistance due to concerns around data privacy, security, compliance. What practical strategies have agencies used to address these concerns while still experimenting? Well, NASCIO has put out a lot of guidance around this, and that's our first comment is do basically control this with experimentation, exploration in a sandbox. Make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. And many states have done that. I think that the key thing around this is having, again, that enterprise governance framework where you're educating the decision makers on the business side because they are enamored by this bright, shiny object. And again, there's a lot more considerations. And I've seen a lot of the chat around data quality. And that's first and foremost for most agencies. You'd ask that question about the efficacy of their data stores and do they feel comfortable exposing them to a large language model when they know that there's data quality issues. I think that's a major consideration is kind of a introspection about the reality of what you're sitting on. And the other, I think we've seen states that I think have very strong overarching governance training oversight. I would and have again centers of excellence. I would point to states like Massachusetts. The Commonwealth has a very strong framework. Georgia has done an excellent job. Michigan has developed again guidelines. Ohio has a very exhaustive checklist. I think having those things in place on the front end before you start beginning to talk about these, and again doing pilots the way California did their innovation pilots, where they had 5 major use cases. They went through a very measured, logical innovation approach to doing that, and I think so. Many states out there are taking that along. Texas has a very exhaustive set of policies and governance frameworks around the use of AI. So I think recognizing that is going to address some of the challenges around the security, privacy. I think the opposite side of that is a survey, and certainly the one that we did in the fall with Accenture, which was around Gen AI enhancing citizen services. And their survey of I think over 1,000 citizens, there is general reluctance and a lack of trust around states using AI supported tools, right? So citizens are very kind of wary of the fact that states are using these tools and may have kind of less trust in those transactions when they find out that end to end that AI has been involved and they're not dealing with a human on the back end. So I think that's something states are going to have to address as citizens have, at least in these surveys across the board, have shown their concern with this. Local governments, what do you say?
Yeah, we have the same concerns. I think that it's interesting because I think right now the most valued use of AI that I'm seeing is augmenting human services. And if it's used correctly, it can create capacity for more human to human interaction.
Yeah.
So if people are able to get answers more rapidly, if employees are able to resolve issues more quickly, it creates more capacity for human to human. And we've seen the same kind of anecdotal references about citizens who are very much afraid of being caught in an AI loop where they can never get a hold of a person because everybody's basically put in AI automations to handle transactions or handle citizen inquiries from edge to edge. And the more sophisticated and kind of more thoughtful applications have really looked at it as how can this augment staff to get them more ready access to information they need to quickly resolve issues or to inform citizens or resolve complaints, so they can either engage more fully as a human to human contact or resolve it and move so they have more capacity for the next person that actually needs to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you. I think that this is one where I think that right now the key value I'm seeing is behind the scenes. It's a workforce multiplier and not a workforce displacer. That
Yeah.
replacing human effort with AI is a really perilous endeavor right now because you tend to
Yeah.
figure out it's not working by citizens complaining, and at that point you've kind of lost trust in the system.
Yeah, I agree. We're seeing that as well, particularly in areas like case management. It's again complements what they're already doing. So we've exhausted our time, but there is one more question I want to ask that I want to ask because it covers both state and local, and again, it's contemporary because of what's coming up, and that is the question around new regulations and the final rule on digital accessibility come into effect. How are institutions tackling the thousands of PDF files that remain inaccessible? Yeah, there are probably millions across that. So, are institutions leaning towards automated solutions? Yes, they're leaning towards automated solutions. Yes, they're looking at AI. There's actually new AI tools that have been brought to the market. There are firms that are specializing in this remediation, and I would say that the challenges for state and local, particularly for states, looking at that is that there are narrowly defined exceptions, but not all PDFs have to be remediated. Only active forms, active documents, and I think so. We've done work with the states. We're not providing them direct guidance, but we have our community of practice with the state IT accessibility coordinators, and I think part of that is recognizing what the rule says about kind of you only have to remediate active PDF. You don't have to do retrospective conversion. You don't have to do archive. You don't if you have archived PDF documents, they're not required under the final rule. If they're minutes of a meeting from 3 years ago, you don't have to do that because it's not active. So there's a lot of things when you start cutting those exceptions out. The universe of all those documents is not as large, but clearly they're going to have to be addressed, and it's going to, I think, states are going to be looking at automated remediation capabilities and also thinking about in the future whether or not they uh, continue to use things like PDF forms. They may have to move to, again, a more accessible format for the web and for their mobile applications. So what are you hearing from the locals? And we'll wrap it up, Daryl.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same thing. I think for the locals, it's having a clear understanding of what you just described, because I
Yeah.
think that where it's reaching organizations is usually at the PIO level, and they are getting fragmented information on what compliance looks like with this new regulation. They're getting kind of different interpretations of, what's in a working document. To your point, I think that this is part of that modernization curve, moving past PDF documents, PDF forms were a bridging strategy to get from paper to digital. But I think ultimately it just works better if you can have just a digital form that feeds into a production system. I think everybody kind of agrees with that, but it has its own management and you have to kind of put some discipline behind that. But I think that to your point, for local governments, there's a heavy dependence right now on business partners on supplemental services to come in and help with that. Because honestly, one of the things, the trends that we've seen over the last decade is democratization of website management, where the content management tools have become so easy to use, kind of WYSIWYG, drag and drop, that you stopped having webmasters. So
Right.
we have a program that's certified government digital services professional. We tie in with the National Association of Government Websites, NAGW. But what we're seeing is that because you have this displacement with other technology services and digital services that are just more tied to production systems, that it's
Mhm.
kind of a mixed landscape. So I think there's going to be a lot of challenges there, but I think that's where finding a good partner is probably the best solution for a lot of local governments.
Yes, I think there's some confusion there in interpretation, but I think our NASCIO's position has been, regardless, of the requirement and mandate. It's the moral and ethical thing to do, and it should have been done. And that's why we're supporting the IT accessibility coordinators from the states with supporting them, because we need to move on this. So anyway, Daryl, appreciate your thoughtful comments today and your informed information from PTI. And I thank our NASCIO members for the information they provide us that we can summarize. And most importantly, I thank all of the attendees today that joined us for the hour to listen to what's going on in state and local tech and what our forecast and prognostication. So look again in the next few months and see if we're on target. All right, everybody have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and enjoy the weather that's coming for most of us. So we may be snowed in for a few days. All right, everybody be well.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care.